I rotated the primary safety coupling until the secondary seals locked at exactly 90 degrees. Below the thick protective glass of the control blister, the gray shale floor of the range hummed with ancient energy. It was my 42nd time managing the supersonic ballistics gauntlet this cycle. Our testing system was built to measure the exact point where defensive carapaces shattered under structural pressure. The heavy automated drones hung from the ceiling rails, their firing pins cold and waiting for initialization. To my left, an elite warrior from the outer systems gripped the safety railing, his thick skin plates shivering as the low-frequency vibrations rattled through his joints. He had survived multiple direct plasma bursts during the field trials, but this range was designed to find the specific limit of his bone density. No one braced for impact when the final candidate stepped into the well. The small human girl left the testing array without a single mark on her body. To track how these systems break down across the outer rim, ensure you are logged into the station directory below. The human candidate was named Jonah. She stood in the center of the large circular well, a small column of unarmored cloth and soft skin who occupied very little vertical space. She carried no shield generators, wore no thick defensive layers under her gray uniform, and possessed no visible external shell. While the giant air compressors whistled to draw power into the machinery, her right hand moved toward her opposite arm. Her fingers hooked under a heavy black tension loop made of thick vulcanized rubber, a common piece of agricultural gear used back on her home world for sealing grain transport valves. She pulled the black band back a few inches, let it snap flat against her wrist with a dry slap, and fixed her eyes on the primary launch tube. I watched the thick rubber band hit her skin, noting the faint red mark it left behind on her arm. She did not adjust her posture as the floor grids began to glow with active power. The tracking system clicked as it began its standard tactical scan. The automated console on my desk flashed a warning light, its interface syncing directly with her internal vitals through the floor sensors. Her resting heart rate remained flatlined at 72 beats per minute. There was no sudden jump in her pulse, no heavy breathing, and no chemical sign of biological panic. The High Preceptor watched the monitor from the upper gallery, his segmented carapace venting small bursts of cooling steam into the overhead exhaust lines as he waited for the first test round. He had designed the current training manual to filter out species that lacked heavy calcified frames. The machine calculated its targeting vectors based on the expectation of a defensive collision, but the human candidate merely stood still in the center of the space. Jonah looked directly up toward the small audio pickup near the control glass. Her mouth opened, and her voice cut through the heavy mechanical rattle of the power grid without any military cadence. "The environment lacks baseline vapor density," she said, her tone completely flat as she rubbed her palms together. "My dermal layer is parting." I ignored the dry environmental complaint and kept my grip tight on the primary system controls. The training manual did not permit any delays for atmospheric comfort once the firing sequence began. I pushed the secondary ignition button, clearing the pneumatic guide rails and sending the first tracking drone sliding down its track. The mechanical sphere stopped 4 meters above the shale, its central red lens locking onto her chest. The automated system reached its final ballistic solution within a fraction of a second. I pulled the main release lever, discharging the solid-core lead projectile from the central launch tube. The weapon fired at 410 meters per second, creating a supersonic crack that made the glass partitions vibrate inside their metal frames. The heavy lead ball traveled down the center line of the well, aimed directly at her center mass with enough kinetic force to smash an elite warrior's carapace into dozens of small fragments. It was a clean release, the tracking telemetry showing a perfect straight line toward the target. The air inside the chamber turned hot as the projectile tore through the low-pressure atmosphere. The terminal console on my desk did not flash the standard green code for a successful impact strike. The screen flickered twice, the lines of data dropping out of target acquisition mode before shifting into a stagnant blue error display. The system was reporting a sudden halt in velocity, but the sensors could not find any trace of a structural collision or a broken frame. The automated tracking lines crossed zero. I leaned toward the observation glass, my fingers pressing against the diagnostic panel to force a manual reset of the tracking data. The blue error code remained fixed on the screen, showing that the projectile had stopped moving entirely within a space of 0.02 of a second. The well was completely quiet. Jonah had not shifted her feet from the shale floor, but her right hand was now raised 30 centimeters from her throat. Her bare fingers were wrapped completely around the hot lead projectile. She had gathered the entire velocity of the shot into her palm, distributing the torque through the soft tissue of her arm instead of resisting the force with a rigid shell. She twisted her wrist slowly, absorbing the remaining rotation of the core before the heat could break her skin. She did not cry out or drop the metal. She slid the spent ballistics core beneath the vulcanized loop on her wrist, securing the weight against her pulse like a common pebble picked up from a road. The high preceptor pulled his haptic data leads out of the gallery wall, his thorax vents shutting down as his entire system went cold. By the next morning, the central network had purged all 9 volumes of the Kinetic Defense Manual from the station servers. We had spent 3 centuries thickening our plates, completely oblivious to the threat of a creature that simply moves with the hit. I spent my final hour on duty wiping the exterior of the eastern display gallery. The vulcanized tension loop sat behind the thick quartz partition, completely slack in the vacuum while holding the deformed lead core fast against the velvet backing. The manual was dropped from the server by morning, but my lateral sacks still leak amber whenever the compressors hiss.